Hello audience, Mr. Z here. You think of Europe and your mind likely brings you to images of Spain, Great Britain, Norway, France, Germany, and all other matter of great empires. But Western Europe is only part of the story. In Central Europe and into the Balkans, you'll find centuries of impressive military and cultural history. Yet, this region, by so much as looking at a map, is clearly incredibly fractured and one might even say disorganized, at least in comparison to the borders of its Western European neighbors, and especially in comparison to neighboring Russia. There have been many arguments as to why, a fairly significant point being the tremendous ethnic and cultural divides between these nations, hence the word Balkanization, quite literally a separating amongst ethnic and cultural lines, being named after the Balkan region itself. However, in the post-World War I era, a proposition was put forth to unite these regions. And you might ask, why? After all, the war saw the dissolution of both the Austrian and Ottoman empires, which developed tremendous internal strifes due to disputes over cultural clashes following the rise of nationalism. While there was a very clear advantage to be gained for these particular nations, that being that throughout history, this region has been the battleground for the powers of the West and the powers of the East, something we know would be proven true once again with the Second World War. Now, because this region was at the constant whim of far larger empires, be it Austria, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, Turkey, etc., borders were constantly changing, cultures were constantly mixing and shifting, and alliances were formed between the smaller states and larger empires until it became an unstable powder keg. Following the Great War, these regions split off from the Russian, Ottoman, Austrian, and German empires and began carving out a modern identity for themselves. However, Poland, who would become the head of this unification movement, was at a crossroads. Either carve out a homogeneous Polish state and identity, or pursue a plan for a Neo-Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, which would stretch from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, earning it the name Intermarium, which means between seas. The goal of the Intermarium was to create a powerful buffer state that was capable of fending off German and Russian invasion, and thus prevent conflicts between East and West. However, this plan was met with little enthusiasm from the members invited, refusing to cooperate with the states around them. Outside of this, the plan also had the support of France, but really only France and no one else. Other nations either disinterested or completely opposed to the idea, most specifically the Soviets, and to an extent the Allies, who thought the Soviets to be only a temporary threat and not worth the destabilization of the Russian national unit. And finally, with the result of the Polish-Soviet War in 1921, significant regions of the proposed union, that being Belarus and the Ukraine, were lost. The plan adjusted to accommodate the Baltic states, who themselves were later absorbed into the Soviet Union. Nothing ever became of the plan. However, even today, we see growing unity between these states, once again with Poland at their head, in the form of the Visegrad Alliance. However, what if these states had, back then, put aside their differences, joining forces to defend against mutual foes, and formed the Intermarium? Such a thing would likely begin with Poland, the Ukraine, and Baltic states as a military union to fight off the Soviets. Such an outcome was possible in late September of 1919, when the Ukraine and Baltic states had briefly liberated themselves from Soviet occupation, while Poland led a tremendous advance into Soviet territory. Witnessing the capabilities of the Polish army and fearing defeat otherwise, they would unite with Poland to push further and secure Belarus. Just months later, the Soviets would begin to press forth into Allied-occupied territory east of Finland, who would be forced to prepare for a potential invasion, drawing it into Poland's alliance, along with Romania, who had been developing a concept with Poland for a grand Eastern European Union, to blockade the communists. As the Polish-Soviet War draws to a close, so does the alliance stick. The White Army remnants stand little chance, and it seems the Soviets would not be the momentary threat everyone believed them to be. United and assured of their combined strength, Poland would once again publicly propose a union of their states for the establishment of the Intermarium. Acknowledging the need for such a force acting as a secure gateway into Western Europe, the plan would earn the support of Britain, France, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden, legitimizing the process and giving the general go-ahead for the establishment of a united military force and establishment of a limited central government to run general functions, whilst the individual regions were free to govern what was unspecified to the central government, similar to the United States, however with greater autonomy given to the individual nations which went on to comprise the Federation, so more like modern-day Russia. Following concerns over conflicts within the Balkans, so would a proposition be put forth to incorporate them into the Union, arguing that independently they would not be able to defend against Austria, Germany, the newly independent Turkey, and now a fascist Italy, should any of them attack, and especially if any of them had allied together, that these states were only capable of fighting within themselves, and nothing productive could ever come of that. Begrudgingly, one by one, the Balkan states would join, with the exceptions of Bulgaria, Greece, and Albania. By the late 1920s, the Intermarium had established unrestricted travel within its own borders and had unified the military forces of all member states into a single disciplined army of over 1 million soldiers, with many more in reserves. With the approaching economic crisis of the 30s, the Intermarium, along with the Soviet Union and other newly formed states at the time, would be hit softest by the turbulent times, as their lack of presence on the world economic scene would prevent their currencies from becoming deflated and their dependencies significantly reduced. This period of time saw significant prosperity for the Soviets in our timeline, as many skilled laborers flocked to it in search of work. However, given the option, many would now be drawn to the Intermarium, allowing it to flourish and develop, whilst other nations barely dragged along at the time. We'd also see the emergence of expansionist ambitions within Italy and Japan, the latter of which would invade Manchuria by this time. The former would begin exerting influence over Greece through financial support and political manipulation, urging Bulgaria to seek closer ties with the Intermarium and petition for membership. During this time, we'd also witness the establishment of the Third Reich and the absorption of Austria into the Empire's borders, while the Sino-Japanese War revved up. With the Intermarium in place, German ambition of expansion to the east is immediately quashed. Even with a joint invasion, such a feat would be too strenuous, and victory could not be assured, even by thin margins, as it would be, in essence, forcing it to fight through a force near equal to that of the Soviet Union, and then still needing to deal with the legitimate threat of the actual Soviet Union. Thus, no effort is made on Germany's part to invade the east, nor the Soviets to invade the west. However, Japan was becoming increasingly belligerent, and with the gradual invasions of the American Philippines, French Indochina, British Burma, and Dutch Indonesia, so had the Japanese Empire attracted the ire of, well, basically everyone, including the Soviet Union, who have shifted its focus from expanding into the west to expanding within the east, annexing Mongolia and Afghanistan in years prior, now setting its sights on China, whilst Germany began exerting political dominance over Denmark and Sweden, the latter of which had been penalized in the previous war despite its neutrality, and would, along with Norway, establish the Nordic Military Pact with Germany. Japan on its own is quickly losing ground to the Allied and Soviet forces, and as the war continues, it becomes clear that it'd only be a matter of time until the island empire came crashing down. Nationalist China would be reestablished while Japan fell under the full control of the Soviets. Germany would diplomatically establish a union with the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, whilst Italy, Greece, and France established the Neo-Roman alliance, both unions inspired by the general prosperity of the Intermarium. Italy, France, and Greece would follow the policy of unity through action and peace through self-governance, maintaining their independent cultures and governments while uniting their militaries into a single formidable force, and promoting a combination of their cultures within their now shared colonies. Germany, however, would seek to unite the nations within its union under an idea of cultural transformation and revival to create a united Nordic people. The Intermarium would become a vast hub of numerous cultures and languages coexisting from within their own spheres and joining together for the implementation of new policies for the Federation as a whole. Whilst diplomatically each state was able to follow its own path and put the needs of their people first, and contributing to the greater union for the betterment of all involved. Thank you all for watching, be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.